Cynthia, I would love to hear more about your work with the Connecticut Coalition of Environmental Justice, and also speaking about the current environmental crisis, but then also specifically about the impact recently on Hartford's inner city residents, and how you see your organization being able to connect to this concert with Concora and to this series at Asylum Hill Church.
I actually was raised by a concert pianist who was also a social activist and one of the first employees and one of the initiators of the Connecticut Coalition for, not a Connecticut Coalition, of the Commission on Human Rights and Opportunities, which is our statewide this anti-discrimination agency in the state of Connecticut. And it's been a unique experience. My mother would mask or cover or cope with all of her disabilities, which she had many from environmental issues, and she would cope with all of this with her music. And she passed this music on to more than 250 students, many of who see me today. And my mother's been gone for 8 years, and they say, "Oh, you look just like your mother." Oh, I mean, they talk about my mother constantly. But she was my inspiration to know that you have a right to legally redress your government, and you have a responsibility to protect the environment that you live in and the environment for those people who live around you. So she was an inspiration in my life. And so to know that a person who was so into music as she was, and a concert pianist, she performed in all kinds of venues. I mean, she performed in Newark, New Jersey at the Coliseum. I mean, my mother was well known, and she had her own music studio where everybody came to her when they wanted to bring forward a musical piece. So it's been a real inspiration. But I never knew that there was a group of individuals who were actually musicians that were so deeply involved in the environmental issues that are facing us. So that's my background, basically, in my history. I lived in Hartford, Connecticut, and Newark, New Jersey for a brief period of time. And in Hartford, I was faced with the fact that I lived near a landfill that was just offensive. I didn't realize it was dangerous, but I realized that it was offensive. And there was a woman on the street that was closest to the landfill by the name of Helen Nixon, and she started an organization called Survivors on Sunset Street. And when I met with Helen, I realized that the survivors on Sunset Street, that every Black man on Sunset Street had died from cancer, but those two had cancer. It was an awakening moment for me. It was traumatic. I got PTSD as a result of that. I literally lost my mind, and I rolled up my sleeves and got busy to shut down the landfill, which ultimately we did shut it down. But not before we cleaned it up. The Justice Department came forward, and they really thought there was going to be a war in Hartford over this landfill. And we were really viciously fighting the landfill operators who had all kinds of leachate coming into our community. They wouldn't cover it up. They just would dump more garbage in, and not with no regard for the people who lived there. So it became a real issue of exactly how we were going to move forward with this landfill, and how we were going to actually save the rest of the people in this state. So in the city in particular, and throughout the state of Connecticut. So it became, CCEJ was evolved from Dr. Mark Mitchell and Sharon Lewis, who's now facing a horrible environmental issue of her own. And I'll talk about that later, and myself and a few others who really believed in fighting the environmental injustices that were facing North Hartford in particular. There was an organization called, a study was conducted by an organization called Toxic Waste and Race, which determined that you were more likely to live near an environmentally risky facility based on your race rather than your income. And for me, at the time, I always thought my mother was rich. I didn't realize we were middle income. But my mother had anything she wanted. And so we didn't see ourselves as poor. But my mother also was very clear that that you have a responsibility to everyone in your community, irrespective of what their condition is. So my mother, who was very much a person who would go door to door every Saturday, she would get me dressed, and she'd give me my little bucket, and we would go to neighbors' houses. She would change their bandages, and it was my job to clean their kitchen and clean their bathroom and get them set up for the week. And so that's what we did every Saturday. So I just felt like you're supposed to take care of other people because they can't take care of themselves. They can't change their own bandages. And so, we spent a lot of time doing that kind of work. So it was kind of ingrained in me to become an environmental activist, if not a leader. And so that's where we worked, and that's Connecticut Coalition for Environmental Justice. Under Dr. Mark Mitchell, he would train us incessantly. He would bring in medical students from UConn and other colleges and universities and make sure that they were going door to door with us to check out the health of the residents and to talk about the environmental risks that we were currently facing. And Dr. Mitchell would tell you, take out your calendars, and he'd say, okay, block off the 1st and the 14th of the month. And he said, because those are the only 2 days you have off. And he would work us. And so he would train us to go get in front of the cameras and actually talk about the issues. And it was just an amazing, amazing opportunity. Sharon Lewis came on. Dr. Mitchell was the first executive director of, Dr. Mark Mitchell was the first executive director of the Connecticut Coalition for Environmental Justice and one of the initiators. And Sharon Lewis came in as the second person that was in charge of the Connecticut Coalition for Environmental Justice. And she's been working incessantly, really very diligently. She's very brilliant, and she's been actually promoting the cause of environmental justice throughout Connecticut.